We must stop the hypocrisy. You know you're lying to me, and you, oh yeah. It doesn't matter, this color don't matter. You say to me, all of these scriptures, all of these words describing me, and you act like you cannot see. So you say, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter to me. His color don't matter, we all are bleeding the same color. I see. Now you, I see, I see. Now you, I see. Oh, why did he write those words? His feet are darker than privacy screens. I don't mean to offend you. His skin be looking like it's really me, and you claim you really don't see, and you swear it's only just me that believes. So you feel that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me. His color don't matter. We all are bleeding the same color. I see. You, I see. You, I see.
Today we commemorate the victims of a staggering crime. Millions of people stolen from their families and communities in Africa, trafficked across the Atlantic, and if they survived the journey, enslaved in the Americas. Millions more were born into bondage, brutally exploited for their labor, and denied their basic humanity. We honor their quiet resilience and courageous acts of open resistance. This global order prevailed for over 400 years and haunts our world even now. In systems and institutions shaped and enriched by chattel slavery, in social and economic inequalities rooted in past injustices, and in biases that permeate our culture and impact us all. On this International Day of Remembrance of the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, we are called to confront these legacies. By rejecting the false narrative of racial difference and the ugly lie of white supremacy, by dismantling racism online, in the media, in schools, at work, in politics, and within ourselves, and by working for truth, justice, and repair. I welcome the initial steps by some governments to address the consequences of slavery, but far bolder actions by many more member states are needed, including commitments to respect African countries' ownership of their own resources, and steps to ensure their equal participation and influence in the global financial architecture and the UN Security Council. Together, let us commit to a world where all people live and thrive in dignity.
Shalom, shalom, everyone. Shalom. So this happened about maybe 2 weeks and a half ago. And this came about to bring about a resolution that urges reparations for slavery for the descendants of the victims of the transatlantic slave trade. Now, this comes at an interesting time because if you have eyes and you can see, you see that we are getting closer and closer to the end. and the birth pangs are getting stronger and stronger. You have a lot of things happening around the world. Most of these things that are happening today will end up changing the world economic system. And that's the point of what's happening today. The war that's happening in the Middle East is a war that I believe is going to change the structure of how the economic financial system is going to function. And not to dig deep in that particular statement, but what I want to say is that at the end of this, we are going to be looking at the foundation of the system in which you will not be able to buy or sell unless you worship the image of the beast. And so, as it relates to reparations, though, I don't believe that just because the UN went about establishing this resolution that they are going to willingly provide and agree to reparations for the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade. I don't believe that that's going to happen. I do believe that the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, when they come out of the lands of their captivity, they will leave with abundance. I'll say that. But it's not going to happen by the will of the nations. It's going to happen by the influence of God's wrath on this earth. Now, I want to look at some of the statements made here in this UN resolution. Really quickly, the UN resolution urges reparations for slavery's historical wrongs. And again, this article was written around a day after the resolution took place on March 25th. And it says the resolution, spearheaded by Ghana, received 123 votes in favor. Now, your usual suspects, 3 countries, Argentina, which joined themselves with the 1948ers and the United States to vote against reparations. And that's pretty typical for the United States and these 1948ers who claim that they didn't have anything or any major hand in the transatlantic slave trade. They're lying, but let's move on. They voted against, and 52 abstain from a vote altogether. Today, we come together in solemn solidarity to affirm truth and pursue a route to healing and reparative justice, said the president of Ghana. And, though the president of Ghana means well by doing this, I think that, the expectation might be a little high for believing that the nations will actually follow through with reparations for the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade. Now, I wanted to go to one part in here, right here. Now, this video here, she makes mention of a name, and I'm going to play up to that point, and I'm probably going to play up to maybe 2 minutes. So let's look at this video real quick for 2 minutes.
The closeness of the place, so crowded that each has scarcely room to turn himself. almost suffocated us. I was soon put down under the decks. I became so sick and low that I was not able to eat, and I wished for the last friend, death, to relieve me. These passages were written by Oladuc Ekwano in his 18th century memoir. Ekwano, from what is now Nigeria, was stolen, shackled, and shipped like cargo, degraded, dehumanized. Mr. Secretary General, Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Tens of millions of others like Ekwano were ripped from their families, their countries and cultures, enslaved and sent to work in foreign lands, to cotton fields here in the United States, to sugar and coffee plantations in European-controlled colonies, in what is now Brazil, Barbados, Jamaica, and dozens more places. All far from home, far from family, far from life. Countless an affront to the very principles enshrined in the Charter of our United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, themselves born in part from these injustices of the past. Indeed, the memory of this atrocity is immortalized here at the United Nations in the Ark of Return and is commemorated in this hall year after year. Because while slavery itself has been abolished, its consequences endure, continuing to shape lives to this day.
So there's a few things that was mentioned in her speech here. One, that slavery still affects those descendants who are descendants of the victims of the transatlantic slave trade. That's a fact. You can't deny that. Well, you know, white people may want to deny that, and that's fine, but you can't deny that. The second thing that she mentioned was the name of a slave. And the name of the slave or of that slave is called Ola. Let's see. Let me go to it really quickly. Oluda Ekwano. And Oluda Ekwano was a slave who was taught to read and write English when he was taken to England, and he wrote a book, an autobiography. Now, they like to use his name. They love to use his name as it relates to him being a slave, but there's something that they just don't tell you, something that he mentions when he began to read the Bible after learning how to write and read. So we're going to look at his statements because they don't tell you this in their talks about him when he comes up. So let's go there. Let me show you that. And this is the statement highlighted or underlined in yellow. It says, first of all, they are, just to give you some background context, they're in England, and the person who he's with had been reading the Bible after, you know, experiencing some frustrations, had been reading the Bible, and Ola Ekwano, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, talked about his desire to want to learn to read and write. And another thing about the African slaves that were sent into slavery, into captivity around the world, people think that they did not have a language and a writing system of their own. No, that's completely false. What they did not know was the English language, a language that their fathers did not know. And the Bible talks about that. We'll show you that some other time. But this is what he says about himself. He says, while I was in the Etna, particularly, the captain's clerk taught me to write and gave me a smattering of arithmetic as far as the rule of 3. Excuse me. He says, there was also one Daniel Queen, about 40 years of age, a man, let me see here, a man very well educated who messed with me on board on board this ship. It says, and he likewise dressed and attended the captain. Fortunately, this man soon became very much attached to me and took very great pains to instruct me in many things. He taught me to shave and dress hair a little, and also to read the Bible. Listen to what he says here. He says that this person taught him many things, and one of those things included how to read the Bible. He goes on to say, explaining many passages to me which I did not comprehend. Down here, the next statement, he says, I was wonderfully surprised to see the laws and rules of my own country written almost exactly here. Where? In the Bible. A circumstance which I believe tended to impress our manners and customs more deeply on my memory. I used to tell him of this resemblance, and many a time we had sat up the whole night together at this employment. Now, what Oluda says, and Oluda, I believe, means Judah. But what he says here is that when this man taught him how to read in the Bible, he was surprised to see the laws and rules from his own country, from where he was taken. And that just simply means that what is written down in the Bible in his country from where he was taken, they already had these rules. And he said they were written almost exactly like the rules that he had in his Bible or in his country was found in this Bible that he was reading, because he learned how to read and write English. He couldn't have gotten this from the Bible if he did not know how to read or write English until he was taught by this Caucasian man. The people in his own country did not know how to read and write in English to even copy any laws from the Bible and make it their laws in their country. So they had to have these laws prior, especially for Oluda, prior to Oluda learning how to read and write English. And so they were already following many of those laws that were in the Bible that he had just learned how to read when he was back in his country. Now, I want to show you the mass tragedy by view of a map that, you know, the victims of the transatlantic slave trade went through at the time that they went through it. It's a visual map that's going to show you the bodies in terms of dots coming out from West Africa, going to the four corners of the earth. All right, so let's check that out.
You stole God's jewelry. You then stole the identity of those jewels. And you think retribution will not happen. You think you don't know who you stole. They don't want their soul out of all control. Listen, we are not missing. We are not missing. We are not lost. We are not lost in the lands of captivity. And all that we lost our traditions. We lost our inheritance, the lands of captivity. Now God, we call out to thee. Said you think he don't know that you stole his people, awakened to life again. But you failed to mention that we are the people, and you took our identity. We are alive for sure, so we're telling you, Christians, oh, we are not missing. We are not missing. We are not lost. We are not lost in the lands of captivity. And all that we lost our traditions. We lost our inheritance, the lands of captivity. Now God, we call out to thee. You think he don't know who you stole. They don't want their soul out of all control. Listen, we are not missing. We are not missing. We are not lost. We are not lost in the lands of captivity. And all that we lost our traditions. We lost.
So that was a map showing you how many of the bodies were taken from West Africa all the way to the Americas, both north and south. And you can see portions going up to Europe. Not as many flooding to South Africa, because that's where the plantations for growing the crops, the sugar, and in North America, the cotton, and a lot of those products were spearheaded back to Europe to fund their economy. And so you'll see from that map how they were transported, and it's giving you a visual that slaves were going to the four corners of the earth. Okay, and that's just the transatlantic slave trade, because on the other end you had the Indian slave trade, and you can't forget the Arab slave trade either. But I wanted to give you a visual of that, because a lot of times people, they tend to overlook that these slaves were taken from West Africa and they were being transported to all four corners of the earth where nations are. Now, I want to give you some slides, show you some scriptures related to this. So let me bring it up. I have to no, I don't want to show that one. Give me 1 second, family. I don't want to add a share screen. Let me come out of this. Let's see. All right, let's add one. And I want to do an entire screen. And then go to my slides here. Let's stop this one. There we go. And go to my slides. Sorry, family. And there we go. All right. So now, what if everything you were taught about Israelite captivity is incomplete? Because hidden in plain sight are prophecies describing a people scattered into all nations. And by the end of this video, you're going to see a pattern most people completely miss. One, because their eyes couldn't see it, but two, because they have listened to the lies of the 1948ers. And so let me go here. All right. So let's begin with the question. I want to start here by asking the question, when was the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts written? First of all, the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts was written for a person by the name of Theophilus. Now, because Luke, who wrote the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts, was writing for this person named Theophilus, it makes it likely that this material was written and delivered at the same time. That's important because it puts a timeline together for us in our mind so we can understand some things about what Luke is going to show us in his gospel. Now, the book of Acts, in the last chapter, it ends before the Apostle Paul's death and after he has been handed over to the Romans, for imprisoning until he died. And so where the book of Acts stops, Luke stops writing before the Apostle Paul dies, because that's where the book of Acts stopped. That's where the writing stopped. It stopped before the Apostle Paul died. Now, the Apostle Paul died sometime between 64 and 65 AD. And this was a time where Christians were being persecuted during the time of Emperor Nero, who blamed a devastating fire on them, one in which he caused himself. So we can conclude that the book of Acts, which ends with Paul in prison, had to be written sometime before 64 or 65 AD. Now, when you have certain scholars attempting to introduce later dates, they only do so to attempt to disprove the prophecy that I'm going to show you Jesus made concerning the temple that was in Jerusalem, because that temple was destroyed in 70 AD. It was destroyed after the death of the Apostle Paul, and definitely after Luke wrote the book of Acts and his Gospels. And since Luke provides Jesus's prophecy concerning the destruction of the temple, the book of Acts and the Gospel of Luke being written before 70 AD makes the prophecy even more compelling. And we know it's true because if you look in the land of Israel, not Israeli, but Israel, that temple is no longer standing, and there is deep history concerning that site that cannot be refuted. Everyone knows that the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. Everyone knows that. It's an argument that you are going to lose if you feel courageous enough to even have that argument. And so the arguments concerning whether the Apostle Paul died in 64 or 65 AD, and whether the books that Luke wrote was before the apostle's death and or after the apostle had died, comes into argument by scholars because Satan is not interested in allowing that truth to be understood. So he wants to distort the truth because the prophecy is true in which Jesus spoke concerning the temple. So scholars who try to make this argument that the book of Acts and the Gospel of Luke was written later than 65 AD, or even 70 AD, they only do so because Satan has gotten to their mind to help his agenda. Now, let us read the prophecy that Jesus made. It's everyone knows Luke 21. Everyone has read this at some point. So let's read it again. He says, and when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the dissolution thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto, for these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. In what days? In those days when Jerusalem is compassed with armies. For there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. What people? Wrath upon the southern kingdom. Now, I have seen in one of the Gospels that a daughter of Asher was also in this place at that time. So this idea that the northern kingdom was not around is false, because one of the writers of their gospel wrote that a daughter of Asher. Asher is one of the 12 tribes from the northern kingdom. Anyway, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. Not one nation like Babylon, not one nation like Assyria, but into all nations. Now, this is a prophecy, and I've bolded the portions within Luke 21 where we want to concern our mental efforts. One of these statements is regarding the destruction of the temple, which happened in 70 AD after the death of the Apostle Paul. And the other is a prophecy of a group of people that was taken captive into all nations. The problem with Christians who read these statements is that they imagine that this is referring to a group of 1948ers people. The current occupants of the land of Israel will never claim that they were in captivity in all nations, because there is zero record of this in history. There is zero history that supports that these 1948ers were enslaved in all the countries in which they claim to have been scattered. And this is why they have you focused on the Holocaust, which was a tragic event that destroyed the lives of not only white people, but black people who lived in that place, and destroyed the lives of homosexuals that lived in that place, destroyed the lives of many different groups of people who were living in that place at that time. It wasn't just a Caucasian group of people who went through this brief wrath of Hitler. However, the current occupants of the land of Israel need a focus point. So the lies of people like John Hagee can be spewed and be a reality in the mind of gullible Christians. If you didn't know that Jesus got his information about this captivity into all nations from Moses and the prophets, I want to show you that. But I think it's important for you to understand, though it's a hard topic to talk about, Jesus is not referring to any 1948er here. And there's no 1948er that will tell you that they were held captive in all nations, especially when they had their hand, whether small or big, in the transatlantic slave trade that scattered all these Africans into the four corners of the earth. Someone say into all the nations, because that's what the phrase four corners of the earth means. Every nation has to have a land, and there were nations in all four corners of the earth, in all of them, all profiting from the transatlantic slave trade, all profiting from the free labor that they had received by destroying the lives of these Africans that came from West Africa and the southern portions of Africa. In Leviticus 28, and I'm going to start at 25, but you can read the whole thing in your own time. It's talking about the fact, and God speaking here, talking about the fact that if the children of Israel, the ancient Israelites, did not obey God's words, they were going to experience something. And we're going to show you what they were going to experience here in a second. And it says, starting at verse 25, and I will bring a sword upon you that shall avenge the quarrel of my covenant. And when ye are gathered together within your cities, I will send the pestilence among you, and ye shall be delivered into the hand of the enemy. And when I have broken the staff of your bread, 10 women shall bake your bread in one oven, and they shall deliver you your bread again by weight, meaning that what you're going to eat is going to be very scarce, no abundance. Got to be very careful, because everyone has to get a little portion. And ye shall eat and not be satisfied. Why? Because there won't be enough. And if you will not for all this hearken or attentively listen unto me, but walk contrary unto me, then I will walk contrary unto you also in fury. And I, even I, will chastise you 7 times for your sins. And ye shall eat the flesh of your sons. Sounds like Deuteronomy 28. And the flesh of your daughters shall ye eat. Sounds like Deuteronomy 28. And this theme is mentioned all throughout Moses's writings, because it's prophecy within historical accounts. And I will destroy your high places, and I will cut down your images, and I will cast your carcasses upon the carcasses of your idols, and my soul shall abhor you. And I will make your cities waste, and bring your sanctuaries unto desolation. And I will not smell the savior of your sweet odors, means that you won't, there be an end of sacrificing, like it is today. And I will bring the land into desolation. It means make it inhabitable. No one will be able to live there. And for a long time, no one did, until these 1948ers had their little grand scheme. But anyway, and your enemies which dwell therein shall be astonished at it. And watch this. And I will scatter you among the heathen, and will draw out a sword after you, and your land shall be desolate, and your cities waste. The English term heathen looks singular. I don't like this term because it masks the true essence of what God is telling us. The Hebrew term that is in the Hebrew text is goyim. The term goyim is plural and it means nations. It is not referring to non-believing nations. I mean, you can use that meaning came with the 1948ers, but goyim is the plural of goy. Goy means nation, singular. Goyim is nations with the S, plural. And so he said, I will scatter you among the nations. This is a prophecy of what God was going to do if the sons of Israel did not obey his word, and they didn't. And we see Jesus talking about the same thing in his prophecy. So Moses already knew that they would rebel, so he was confident that their descendants would be scattered among the nations like God said, because this is what Moses says in Deuteronomy 31. Verse 24, it says, and it came to pass when Moses had made an end of writing the words of this law in a book. It says scroll there in Hebrew, until they were finished, that Moses commanded the Levites, which bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, saying, take this book of the law. He's talking about the 5 scrolls from Genesis to Deuteronomy, all written down in one scroll, and it all called the book of the law, or all this law. And it was titled that. Moses titled it that for a specific reason, in which we will talk about. It's important to make the distinction between that statement, that phrase, and commandments, law, statutes, and judgments. It's important because they all do not mean the same thing. But anyway, it says, take this book of the law and put it in the side of the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be there for a witness against you. For I know your rebellion and your stiff neck. Behold, while I am yet alive with you this day, ye have been rebellious against the Lord, and how much more after my death? Gather unto me all the elders of your tribes and your officers, that I may speak these words in their ears, and call heaven and earth to record against them. For I know that after my death, ye will utterly corrupt yourselves and turn aside from the way which I have commanded you, and evil will befall you in the latter days. Now, when Jesus made that prophecy in Luke 21, the beginning of that prophecy was the destruction of the temple. Now, if you read the book of Acts, the last days began at Pentecost. And so anything that happened after Pentecost is considered the last days. And the temple being destroyed happened in the last days. And this being taken in captivity happened in the last days. And so you have Moses here in Deuteronomy 31 saying, an evil will befall you in the latter days, because ye will do evil in the sight of Yahuwah, to provoke him to anger through the work of your hands. So Moses had already told the ancient Israelites that evil will befall their descendants in the latter days. The ancient Israelites knew that their descendants are one with them because of the covenant that they made with God. That covenant also included the fact that if one person sinned, all was guilty. So only in the new covenant can a person be responsible for their own sin. It should be blatantly obvious that if we find ourselves in the land of our captivity today, our ancestors had turned aside from the new covenant. They didn't even receive it, because the ones who did received it died off sometime between in that time where Nero went on his rampage after the death of Paul. And then who became in charge of the church? Yes, the church fathers, the Caucasian Gentiles that gave you a corrupt version of what people interpret as the Trinity today. A corrupt version, a lie. And in fact, the Apostle Peter said that false teachers would come after their death, after they died. And the Apostle Peter died shortly after the Apostle Paul. And the last apostle, the Apostle Paul, the Apostle John, died somewhere between, I'll say, 90 AD to 100 AD. And when do you start to see the writings of the church fathers? Right after the the death of the Apostle John. But that doesn't mean that that's when the distortion started, because they were already battling distortion, because Pharisees came into the fold of the Messiah and they were spewing their distortions by trying to have you keep the circumcision and all these other things written in the law that they was trying to have people keep, not knowing that when you are in Mashiach, you are no longer under the law, because you received the new covenant, and the laws, notice I said laws, Torah or Toroth, the feminine plural of Torah, the singular, which is translated as law or laws. Those are different from commandments. And so God said, when you accept the new covenant, he'll write his laws, teachings. That's Torah, Toroth, teachings in your heart. So the teaching of Yahuwah is in your heart. That's a benefit of the new covenant. Our fathers still rejected Jesus and the new covenant because they sought to keep their own, to seek about their own righteousness and not the righteousness of God, which comes by belief in the Torah that is supposed to be written on the heart of anyone who becomes born again. And so if our ancestors were taken in this captivity that Yahushua talked about, they were guilty of the old covenant, the one that makes all people guilty if one person sins. But the good news is that we can return to Mashiach, not merely in a hypocritical way, like most people who claim to have a relationship with God. We can accept the new covenant and live sin-free lives, which is being without blemish. That's tanim. That is tanim, the Hebrew term tanim, which is translated as perfect in Genesis 6 as it relates to Noah. And of course, that term is used throughout the Hebrew text, going all the way to Malachi. Amen to that. But Moses knew what our end would be. And so he stated these conditions in his day so we would have no excuse. Why? Because God wanted these words to witness against us. We are guilty. and it's time to fix it. However, this statement comes after what God said in Deuteronomy 30. So let's look at that. Deuteronomy 30. And in Deuteronomy 30, we want to start at verse 1 because these are going to be statements that's made after Deuteronomy 28. And this is what he says here. And it shall come to pass when all these things come upon thee, the blessing and the curse which I have set before thee, and thou shalt call them to mind where? Among all the nations in which you were scattered by captivity. Moses is talking about the captivity in all the nations here in this verse. You can't separate captivity from scattering. Being scattered and captive comes hand in hand. They are together. They can't be separated, which is why the 1948ers never state anything about them being in captivity in all nations. Because if they do, they'll alert the fact that, wait a minute, but there's no historical record out there showing that you were in captivity in all the nations. Anyone who claims to be Jewish can say that they are Jewish and claim that their ancestors are Jewish, but none of them can say that they were in captivity. It's like the statement that says, would you trade places with a black person? And many of your white people will say no, because they know the harsh realities of being black in these nations. And it's not talking about all the Africans, tribes in Africa. This statement is specifically related to, or it began, this statement began with those who were in captivity, picking cotton, planting and harvesting sugarcane for sugar production. Everything that helped the economy of the elites in their time. So no white person wants to trade places with the black person because they know the harsh realities. And your 1948ers can never say that they were in captivity in all nations because there's no historical record. Number one, everyone would obviously know that they're lying, and that would have wheels turning. You know, people are going to start thinking, well, if you guys weren't in captivity in all nations, then this can't be talking about you. This obviously is not talking about you. Moses is not talking about you. Hold on. Let me rethink this thing, because my white pastor just told me that these the Jews, they don't exist anymore. The church is the Jew. The church is Israel. No, that's a lie. That is a complete fabrication of the truth. Now, I know that my ancestors, the descendants who were victims of the transatlantic slave trade, are the descendants of the ancient Israelites. So that makes me an Israelite by name, by genetics. But you have to understand how when we took on the curse because we didn't obey God's word, God also said that those who did not obey his word, he was going to cut off from the congregation of Israel. So to think that we were not cut off from the congregation of Israel in the lands of our captivity is, I mean, you need to rethink that. You need to rethink that. Because that means that if all of us were cut off, only one person remained, and that was Yahushua Hamashiach. Maybe that's why Satan doesn't want you to know so much of this truth concerning the captivity. And then guess what? Paul says that we have to be grafted back in. Well, who are we being grafted back into? It's not ourselves, because we were cut off. Yahushua Hamashiach was the only one that remained. He became the sole olive tree. Read Isaiah. Read the song about the vineyard. Anyway, so God's saying here, and thou shalt call them the blessing and the curse to mind where? Among the nations, where Yahuwah thy God has driven thee, and thou shalt return unto the Lord thy God. This awakening is about the return unto Yahuwah Elohim. Right now, we must return, but we can't return with all this leaven. We can't return with all these false doctrines. We can't return with these lies. We have to humbly return. We have to honestly return. And how you return is by saying, Lord, I know that you sent us into our captivity. You cut us off from the congregation of Israel, and Yahushua Hamashiach was the only one that remained, and he became Israel. And we have to be grafted back into him. And when we get grafted back into him, we will be a member of his body again. Who is he? He is Israel. We are his house. House means family. I know that has somebody's mind twisted up, because if you believe that I'm saying that Jesus became the Father, then you're absolutely right. See, it's all about understanding the parabolic imagery that's involved, which the prophets wrote down. But, you know, to each his own. Everybody will believe what they want to believe, and we'll see who's correct in the end. Because there is going to be a correction. And so I put my beliefs before you, and you can judge them how you may. But I promise you, judge wisely. Judge wisely. Because I believe I was called to teach. And I'm making sure that your blood is not on my hands. That's why every statement that I make sure that I make it, and I'm trying my best to make it as clear as possible, so that when you go before the judgment, you cannot say that you did not understand, that you believe what I was saying was a lie. Turns out it's true. We'll see. There's no need for me to argue with anybody. I respect what you believe, and I respect what I believe. And all my beliefs will be on this channel. Now, he says, and shall return unto the Lord thy God. So he's talking about the fact that when they get in the nations and they call these blessings and the curse to mind, and they see that they are cursed, because it's definitely not the blessing. They see that they are cursed. It's going to trigger them to start thinking about God's word. Oh, now this awakening becomes more valid, because now you see a lot of so-called African Americans waking up to who they are as a people. Yeah, you're going to have some African Americans that's stuck in John Hageeville, but we going to bring them out. We'll give them enough gas money so they can get up out of there. He says, and shall obey his voice according to all that I command thee this day. thou and thy children with all thine heart and with all thy soul, that then when you do all of that, then Yahuwah Elohim will turn thy captives. In Hebrew, it says, return your captives. What does that mean? Take them out of the lands of their captivity and have compassion upon you, and will return and gather you from where? All the nations where Yahuwah Elohim has scattered thee. Where? In all the nations where he scattered you, where you are, your ancestors were held captive, picking cotton, growing sugar, being distributed for rum. The Hebrew Bible says wine, but rum, the prophets didn't know anything about rum, and the English started making rum in England and transporting it around the four corners of the earth for economic profit. So whether it says rum or wine, it's the same thing regardless. In the lands of your captivity, he says he's going to gather you from all the nations where Yahuwah Elohim has scattered you. If you be driven out unto the outmost parts of heaven, from there will Yahuwah Elohim gather you, and from thence he will fetch you. And Yahuwah thy Elohim will bring thee into the land which your fathers possessed, and thou shalt possess it. And he will do good to thee and multiply thee above thy fathers, above thy fathers. And here's new covenant talk. And Yahuwah Elohim will circumcise your heart, not the foreskin of your wanker, the heart of your seed, that would be us, to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, that thou mayest live. Moses wrote about our captivity in the lands in which our ancestors were taken captive in the four corners of this earth. Now, I want to show you something that Amos said. Let me see here. Going back. Yeah, I want to show you something that Amos says in chapter 5. Now, he's talking about the northern kingdom here. And he says this. He said, this is what the Lord says to the Israelites in the northern kingdom. Did you bring to me sacrifices and offerings during the 40 years in the wilderness, O house of Israel? So now he's talking about a time where they began their exodus from Egyptian captivity in the land of Mitzrayim. I like to use the term Mitzrayim because Moses used that term. Moses did not know of a term named Egypt. And that's with great purpose that I do that, because there is some things tied to that name Mitzrayim. All right. And so I'll talk about that at another time when I talk about more of these prophecies about the land of our captivity. But I don't like to use Egypt because that's the Greek name, and the Greeks came way after Moses, and Moses used Mitzrayim for a reason. Now, he says, O house of Israel, you shall take up Sikuth, your king, and Kiyun, your star god, your images that you made for yourselves, and I will send you into exile beyond Damascus, says Yahuwah, whose name is the God of hosts. Now, in Amos 5:25, God is speaking and explaining why he is going to send the northern kingdom into exile beyond Damascus so that they can go in captivity, because this is speaking about the Assyrian captivity. God is speaking of exiling them beyond the borders of their land, Damascus, which is the last place that they resided before they went into captivity, which is why he says beyond Damascus. This exile took place when the Assyrians captured the Israelites in the northern kingdom and placed them in captivity in Halah and Habor on the river of Gozan and in the cities of the Medes. One nation only took the northern kingdom captive. This is not a fulfillment of Deuteronomy 28, which talks about going into captivity in the four corners of the earth. Last time I checked, Assyria sat on a small parcel of land in what the British call the Middle East, not in the four corners of the earth. They did not have authority over all the 7 continents. Now, I also am showing you this because Stephen uses Amos chapter 5:25 as a quote in his word to the elders of Israel before they stone him, which may be one of the reasons, one of the reasons why they stone him. This quote in Amos 25 that Stephen uses before he dies is very important. He used the quote to speak concerning a prophecy that he understood would take place after his death. So let's take a look at what Stephen says. Now, he's talking about Moses, and when he's recalling the history of Abraham and Abraham's descendants, he gets to the place where he's talking about Moses, Moses being learned and all the wisdom of the Egyptians and all of that stuff. And then he gets to the part where they make their exodus, and then they get to the wilderness, a wilderness that we will meet one day. And Moses, they disowned him, saying, "Who made you a ruler and a judge? Is the one whom God sent to be both a ruler and a deliverer with the help of the angel who appeared to him in the thorn bush? This man led them out, performing wonders and signs in the land of Mitzrayim and in the Reed Sea." It's not Red Sea. The Hebrew reads Reed Sea, in the important part, like the Song of Moses. But we'll touch on that some other time, because you have to understand Egyptian mythology to understand why Moses wrote Reed Sea. Anyway, and in the wilderness for 40 years, this is the Moses who said to the sons of Israel, "God will raise up for you a prophet like from your brethren." This is the one who was in the congregation in the wilderness together with the angel who was speaking to him on Mount Sinai, and who was with our fathers, and he received living oracles to pass on to you. Living oracles, which means the oral Torah. That's what he's talking about. There's a written Torah, and then there's an oral Torah. The 1948ers and their Mishnah and Gemara, they're going to tell you that the Mishnah and the Gemara are the oral explanations of the Torah, the plural teachings that was handed to Moses, and Moses handed it down to Joshua, and Joshua to the elders and all of that. It is true. There is a oral Torah, but then they say that the written Torah is the first 5 books of Moses, and I can show you on the stone tablets that that's a lie. But anyway, he says, and he received, that's Moses received, living oracles to pass on to you. That's important to understand here. Our fathers were unwilling to be obedient to him, but repudiated him, and in their hearts turned back to Mitzrayim, saying to Aaron, the second witness, Moses will be the first, make for us gods who will go before us, for this Moses who led us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what happened to him. At that time, they made a calf and brought a sacrifice to the idols and were rejoicing in the works of their hands. But God turned away and delivered them up to serve the host of heaven. As it is written in the book of the prophets, it was not to me that you offered victims and sacrifices 40 years in the wilderness, was it, O house of Israel? This is the quote that comes from Amos 5. You also took along the tabernacle of Moloch. And Moloch is just a corrupted form of Malek, which means king in Hebrew. It just means king. And the star of the god Ramphah, the images which you made to worship. I also will remove you beyond Babylon. Now look at that. Instead of saying beyond Damascus, Stephen says beyond Babylon. Why? He says this because for the southern kingdom, that is Yehuda, Levi, and Benjamin, the last place that they had their captivity and their borders were, and some of them stayed, was Babylon. The next place from there, if you look at Amos 5:25, the northern kingdom, God says, I will exile you beyond Damascus, which was their land, that the borders of the land that they were residing at that time before the exile. He removed them and sent them into captivity. God is also removing the southern kingdom. Now, they're not in Babylon when they are in the land of Palestine, which the Romans called it. But the point that Stephen was making is that from your captivity in Babylon, you are going to go into another captivity. That's why he uses this quote, because his point is beyond Babylon. I'm going to remove you beyond Babylon, and you're going to go into exile. You are going to go into exile. Babylon was the borders of the last place of the southern kingdom resided. It also was the place where they were in captivity, and they was also freed from captivity, but some of them still stayed. So Stephen is speaking of a coming captivity because Amos 5:25 is speaking of the coming captivity that will be beyond Damascus for the northern kingdom. But what captivity is Stephen referring to? Now remember, this is the book of Acts, and I'm sorry I didn't change it from Amos 5:25, but this is Acts chapter 7. Stephen is looking ahead to the future of what's going to happen to all Israel after his death. And I can say after his death because this captivity that he's prophesying about by using the quote that comes from Amos 5:25 happened after his death. But what captivity? Well, Jesus prophesied about it and stated that it would happen after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. That's Luke chapter 21. Let's look at what it says again. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. That time has not been fulfilled. And this prophecy, them being led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. It has not been fulfilled. This prophecy has not been completed, I should say. That's what fulfilled means, completed. Meaning that those who were taken away into captivity in all nations still remain in the lands of their captivity. Why? Because Jerusalem is still trodden down of the Gentiles. Those 1948ers who are there right now, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So this is still going on right now. And I'm sorry, I still did a typo and didn't change Amos 5:25 to Luke chapter 21, verse 24. So forgive me. So this is a prophecy that had taken place after the destruction of the second temple, 70 AD. This can't be speaking about those 1948ers because they have zero historical record of them being in captivity in all nations. Yes, they will say that they were scattered, and they are scattered in all nations. Seems like a convenient lie, but they ain't give you the rest of the truth that's connected to that scattering. They are scattered and in the lands of their captivity, and not any one of those Jewish people who claim to be Jewish has ever experienced captivity in all the nations in the four corners of the earth where they have been scattered. Ask them. Ask them. They haven't. However, there's only one group of people who has more than ample historical records of a mass captivity in all nations. And that event happened in the transatlantic slave trade. So we'll conclude the message for today. Don't forget to like and share this video to help the YouTube algorithm place this on the recommended feed. If this content has resonated with you, please go ahead and subscribe and apply all notifications to be notified when we do a live or drop a new video. For more content, click the playlist in the top left corner of your screen. Let's get this to 200K subscriptions. Shalom.
You stole God's jewelry. You then stole the identity of those jewels. And you think retribution will not happen. You think you don't know who you stole. They don't want their soul out of all control. Listen, we are not missing. We are not missing. We are not lost. We are not lost in the lands of captivity. And all that we lost our traditions. We lost our inheritance, the lands of captivity. Now God, we call out to thee. Said you think he don't know that you stole his people, awakened to life again. But you failed to mention that we are the people, and you took our identity. We are alive for sure, so we're telling you, Christians, oh, we are not missing. We are not missing. We are not lost. We are not lost in the lands of captivity. And all that we lost our traditions, we lost our inheritance, the lands of captivity. Now, God, we call out to thee. You think he don't know who you stole. They don't want their soul out of all control. Listen, we are not missing. We are not missing. We are not lost. We are not lost in the lands of captivity.